Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's independent consulting chat, the IC chat. We are happy to have you here. We're going to continue to welcome people into the chat. Today is October 20th, 2022, and I'm super excited to be emceeing today with the amazing Tasha Parker. Does she mind if I say newly minted PhD? She's got a great practice, evaluation, and another kind of practice that I'm sure she's going to tell you about. So I'm going to let Tasha take over, and be sure, as always, that you feel comfortable and welcome to put questions and ideas in the chat. Tasha's going to present, and then we're going to have a discussion, and then I'll remind you of the upcoming sessions that we're going to have. So Tasha, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right. And so also throughout the presentation, since it's pretty short, feel free to kind of poke out questions like while I'm speaking. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about what trauma and resiliency informed community consulting looks like for me. And so I'm Tasha Parker. I'm the founder and principal of the Institute of Development. I'm also a community psychologist, a social worker, and trauma specialist. I have a private practice where I provide primarily therapeutic trauma services, but also I have the Institute of Development where I do program evaluation, strategic action planning, program development. And part of the reason that kind of got me into why I wanted to start a consulting business is, as a trauma specialist, I was doing a lot of good work with people, helping them, partner with them as they go through this journey of healing, but they were going back into systems that were inherently re-traumatizing and re-victimizing them. And so it was really important for me to figure out, so what does it look like as I venture into this world of community consulting to bring that therapeutic approach while also continuing to try to help systems and organizations heal. So what is trauma and resiliency informed consulting? I kind of just talked earlier to Anne, I kind of made it up. There are people who do community consulting from this trauma perspective, where they kind of help organizations transition, do this paradigm shift to becoming trauma and resiliency informed, but often what's happening is they help them implement certain strategies. But for me, when I think about trauma and resiliency informed community consulting, is creating regenerative organization systems and communities for all living beings. So it's not just about the individual organizations that we serve, but the systems that they reside in, as well as the community members. And for me, in my practice, that's a therapeutic approach. I was speaking to someone the other day from a foundation, and he said, what do you envision? Like, what's your biggest goal? Like, at the end, what's your ideal work as a community consultant? And I said, kind of doing like I do with therapy. Like, it would be perfect to be the community consultant for an organization to help them transition and go on this journey of change. Right, so really individualized, taking this therapeutic approach, almost like, you go to therapy, you have a treatment plan. And so you would have a community consultant that would create something like a treatment plan for you. And I think that's important in the work that we do. And so for me, it means meeting people where they are. And so part of that is understanding that we all don't have the same language, we don't have the same understanding. And regardless of what is right, sometimes it's what's right for us. And a lot of times we see things that organizations need to do or shouldn't be doing, but really being able to meet them where they are and understanding that they may not be ready for that, and really focusing on getting people to that concept of readiness to change before implementing certain protocols and practices for these organizations. I think it's also acknowledging and resisting harm. And when I say acknowledging harm, is knowing that harm has been done. A lot of the organizations that we serve still reside in systems that have caused harm. for the people that receive those services and the people that work within those organizations are often receiving harm. And it's not about intention, it's about impact. And so then it's also about us resisting, and once again, resisting methodology and questions and practices that could also cause further harm for not only the organizations, but the people who are responsible for providing services, and then the consumers receiving services. And I think it's also important that we resist harm for us. Sometimes as community consultants or just any type of professional, we are in situations that sometimes they don't feel safe for us. And whether it's because finances or that discomfort of saying no, we will stay in situations that are causing harm. So I think that goes twofold. It's not just about acknowledging and resisting harm for others, but also for yourself. Equitable outcomes and sustainability are also important. I think it's, when I do therapy, I always say each session I leave and I want people zipped up like they'll never see me again for sustainability purposes. And I think it's important in the work that we do that we be honest with that. Often organizations don't have the funding to keep us around forever and to do all the things that we may see that needs to be done. So I think it's important in the work that we do, whether it's through recommendation, evaluation, or program development, we're intentional about putting certain processes in place. And so the organizations can be sustainable and continue to take the steps to incorporate and implement the recommendations. And I think that it is even more pivotal that before we get into this work, particularly when we're involving people within the organization or consumers of services, you get real clear about what resources are available to make the change. Sometimes, an organization may, let's say they want to do an evaluation to see if their employees are satisfied or they're meeting whatever outcomes. And then we get all this feedback. We may say, oh, so what do you think could be changed? What would it look like for things to be better? I think prior to doing things like that, we need to get really clear on the resources available, time, money, if those changes are actually going to be able to happen, because that is harm being done when I ask you for your input, but there's no way we're going to be able to utilize it. And so whether that means us being honest with the consumers and organization members that, hey, I don't have the power. There may not be the resources for change, but what you have to say is important, but being transparent about that. And so SAMHSA has done a really good job of creating these trauma-informed principles, and they also have domains. And when I think about the principles, it's about the rules that we follow and in the work that we do, not just the rules that the organization that we work with, the rules that they should follow. And I think it's important to encourage them to do those things. However, in the grand scheme of things, I think we have a duty, an obligation to follow these rules ourselves. And so in regards to safety, and so I've kind of shifted these from an organization approach from a community consultant perspective, but also kind of try to bridge that gap. So from a safety perspective, I think it's important when we're creating recommendations for clients, but also when we are doing the work collecting data, when we're designing the tools, we need to be mindful of the language that we use and how psychologically safe the methods are. So if you're doing focus groups where we are asking frontline staff to be in groups with their leaders, and we're asking them to discuss, their opinions and feelings about certain practices, that may not be the most safe place to do that. And so keeping all those things in mind. And acknowledging that, once again, it's this concept of sense of safety. It's not always about my intention, it's the impact. And I think we have to just clearly and directly ask those questions. Is there anything that I can do to make you feel more comfortable? Is there anything that I can do to create a more safe environment to welcome feedback? I think any of us who've done qualitative research have been in situations where people are voluntold to participate versus wanting to be part of that. And that does create a sense of it's just not safe for people. And I think we have an obligation to ensure as much as we can that the people that we work with understand that, we want people that are wanting to be there, part of those process, and it's important for them to be safe in those spaces. Trustworthiness and transparency. I'm always a little weird about transparency because I think transparency doesn't equate honesty. Sometimes transparency is used, I'll tell you this, I don't have to tell you this right here. And so SAMHSA says trustworthiness and transparency, but I like to say trustworthiness and honesty, because I can be direct and kind, right? I can be clear and honest about what's happening, the whole story, what's happening, not just, I'm going to tell you this, so hopefully we don't have to talk about this. I'm going to tell you that, yeah, you get these raises this week, but you won't get another raise for 5 years. And so being honest about the complete situation. I think it's important to, when you're working with people, to be clear about the information that is needed to be shared. And I think that also ties back into safety. So if I'm collecting data on employees or consumers of service, how much access do I give to my client? I think one point in time, Kurt talked about a situation where someone wanted access to the students' data where, they were responsible for supervising them. I think being transparent with our clients, the limitations that we have is we do have to protect the people that not only that we're working with them, but that they're working with. I think that is a duty. Peer support. From the community consulting, that's about how do we support other consultants, right? And are we facilitating support amongst the other organizations that we work with? I think peer support is also about knowing that, I may have an opportunity that may be outside of my realm of competence to do, and I can do some of it, but also knowing when and how to reach out and being open to be the person to step in and support. Collaboration, and mutuality. Are we the person that knows the most in the room? I think that's always an issue. If we are truly collaborating, we're not the all-knowing in the room. Intellectual humility is as important as cultural humility, particularly when you do the work that we do. When we lack intellectual humility, I think we become dangerous and people can get hurt just as well as with cultural humility. Empowerment. It's kind of like what we talked about earlier. Am I ensuring that the partners that we are working with know that that they are equipped with the skills for me to step out and still sustain this change? Am I making recommendations in a way that outlines the steps that need to be taken in order to successfully fulfill them? Have I educated them about process evaluation, even though these may not be things that I'm going to provide because we don't have the time or we don't have the money? Am I empowering these organizations to be sustainable in the work that they've enlisted from us, but also ensuring that not only do they acknowledge, but there's clear processes in place in which they include all voices, well, I shouldn't say all, as many voices as they can across the organization, both horizontally and vertically. And on top of that, I think it's important when our practices. And so when we're doing certain evaluations or program development, strategic action planning, are we being intentional about including as many voices as possible, whether we believe that they're part of the process or not? And so that means if an organization has a technology department and we're working on a theory of change or we're working on whatever this is, their voices matter too, right? And how do we be intentional about including that and communicating that to the people, to our clients, the importance of including all those voices, but also giving people the choice of whether or not they want to participate. Cultural, historical, and gender issues. I don't think we can do this work without always keeping that in mind, and communicating that as we once again develop methodology, discuss who's at the table when we're deciding what the work plan is going to look like, right? I think those things are all important, and acknowledging that although that a lot of the community organizations that we work with are doing the work to bring about more change, we have to acknowledge that these historical issues are still embedded in the systems and the practices, right? Because just because I add a component or change a component, that system that it exists in is still what it is, and acknowledging that, I think, and being honest about the need to really dismantle piece by piece and rebuild. And that has to be an incremental thing. Okay, so then SAMHSA also has these implementation domains, which are really about the rules. So this is where I'm going to be looking over here because I didn't have enough room on this screen, so bear with me. And I won't go through all of these, but these are basically about the different activities that should take place, both when we're doing our work and the recommendations and how the recommendations that we're making to the organizations that we're working with. And so I think it's important to be ensuring that we're communicating with leadership about what the support looks like that we will need, but also the type of supports and guidance that we would need from them in relation to working with their staff. Because sometimes I think when a lot of times our contact is with who's ever funding whatever the project is, but in all actuality, we need more than them. They're not the people providing the work. Like, we need to have interaction. We need time from the service providers. And I think we have a duty to communicate to them the different supports that need to be in place in order for us to include the service providers. So maybe that looks like, ensuring that there's a way that they can offload some of the work while they're participating in this cohort experience, or so while they can participate in this focus group, or they're going to have to make that time up and work an extra 5 hours at the end of the week. So I think we have a responsibility to be communicating to the leadership about those things. And then, of course, there's a million. This is just little snippets. Policy, I think also when we're making recommendations based off evaluations that we've done, are we being explicit about the change in policies, not just adding policies and processes, but also changing them, sometimes getting rid of them, right? I think that's pivotal in helping organizations understand the impact that policy has, not just on the work that they do, but how it's done in relation to the people who are responsible for delivering those services. I'm really, part of the reason that really pushed me to take this therapeutic trauma resiliency informed approach is that often we are really concerned with the outcomes of, how is this program doing, which is great. Like, we want consumers of services, we want the communities to be well, but if we're not taking care of the people who are responsible for delivering the services, then I don't know if this can ever be sustainable, and if these outcomes can ever really be lasting or equitable. Oh, that's a lot. So physical environment, once again, is there space for, when we're doing our work, is there a space for people to, when they are getting overwhelmed? I think we've all, well, I can't speak for everybody. I know, at least for myself, there's been times when I've done focus groups and people have started to have some emotional experiences. Do you have processes set in place so they can take a step out to take care of themselves without feeling alienated or on the spot? Those types of things. But also, when we're making recommendations, are we keeping those things in mind of changes that the organizations need to make? It has to go beyond the data, like the quantitative stuff and the qualitative stuff, but also speaking to what we know, and what we know in relation to the things that impact the fidelity of whatever program changes that we're trying to get them to. Okay, I won't go over all of these. I think the next thing though is also financing. I think sometimes, not sometimes, when you think about doing this from a trauma and resiliency informed place, it's important to acknowledge when people make investments in the work that we do, it comes at a cost, right? It could come at a cost, not only because they have to pay for these services, but sometimes as a result of the things that we do, it may come at the cost of ending services, or it may come at the cost of people needing to work more to get us the information that we need. But more importantly, making sure that the organizations have the resources in place to make the changes and recommendations, right? If someone wants to see, are we really changing lives? And then we figure out, well, you're not, because you need to serve X more amount of people, or you need to add this service. Have we even had the conversation up front? I think this is proactive measures about the resources that will be available. And of course, evaluation. I think in relation to evaluation, that should always be trauma informed, because the ability that data has to harm people, data is great, but it's also meant to be interpreted. And we're not the only people who get to interpret that data. So ensuring that when we are doing evaluations, that when possible, we're equipping people with the knowledge and the skill to be able to, one, to give us feedback on it, but also understand what it means, and then being able to communicate that out. I'm gonna skip the next slide because I didn't. And so essentially, why is this important? I think the most important thing about this is because when you think about this whole concept of equitable outcomes and sustainability and capacity building, it's all great. We have all these different methodologies to do that, but we forget we're all humans having a human experience. And if we don't do our due diligence to ensure that we're taking care of the humans who are responsible for delivering the services, and that's also us managing the services, receiving the services, and when we're not intentional about that, it's difficult for outcomes to be sustainable, right? I don't know if, when I think about the work that I do as a clinician, I always feel like I tell people, I don't want you to be needy. I don't want you to feel like, well, it's okay, I got my next appointment on Wednesday. We want to empower people and equip them with the skills and the belief that, hey, I can figure this out and I can do this. And I think part of community consultants is ensuring that every person that we come in contact with when we're doing the work that we do has a little bit more of that, a little bit more true empowerment, and we're educating people on, like, what does it really mean, capacity, right? What does power really mean within communities? And so, thank you. Ta-da, that's the end. I didn't have some fancy, I thought I had like a fancy slide, or I didn't have it. So this is what you get. I appreciate you taking the time to listen. Here's my contact information.